Rory and Maul respond to Joe Budden and address their side of the secret meeting.
I have never spoke to anybody, not to cut you off. Maul, me, Jamal. I have never spoken to anybody about feeling overworked and underpaid a day in my life. Not nobody on this planet have I ever had a conversation with, hey, I feel like I'm overworked and underpaid. I have never said that in my life.
But where I was disappointed, along with Maul, was in telling that story, which I expressed to Savon the day that came out. My only issue is that you completely lied. And then Scream Man lying, yo, why is Maul coming to me to tell me this? That never happened once, ever. That's just a flat, and that was weird. To be honest, Scream Man, and I wouldn't say I know him.
Y'all keep calling him that.
That's my. That was my guy. As a person in the time that he spent, I've seen him around every now and then. Text whatever. I've always Scream Man as a person.
Yeah.
This showed a whole new light to me with Scream Man.
I'm disappointed, bro. I'm not gonna lie.
Like, you just flat out lied and said Maul came to you that he was overworked and underpaid. Yo, why Maul telling me this? He never did tell you that. You made that up. Production was explaining that they were overworked and underpaid because Patreon had
That's
launched,
the craziest
and
part.
it was. I even said this to Savon. I said, how could Maul and I feel like we're overworked when at the end of the day, we show up, record, and leave?
They came to me and Rory because they felt like they couldn't go to that dude anymore.
Obviously. Yes, of course.
So now you sitting down on camera feeling like you could talk to him, and now you want to have this viral moment. Now you do. And it's like, well, say the shit you was saying to me and Rory back then. Say it now. Say that on camera.
And they also have words about when they fired Carl. Now, I have to give it to Rory and Maul as they finally decided to talk about the secret meeting that occurred. And they did this all on their Patreon. Shout out to them for finally doing the type of content people have been waiting for. So let's get right to it. This whole episode is in response to Joe Budden's recent sit-down with Savon, Don, and Alex. And boy, was that interview a doozy. They seem to tell the story of the secret meeting that unraveled the Joe Budden podcast. But like I said in a recent video, I think they were kind of manicuring what happened and engaging in a self-serving dialogue about the events that took place. But Rory and Maul decided to go on their Patreon and tell their side. So I'm going to be going over the key points of what Rory Maul said. And I have to say, Rory and Maul seem very, very disappointed in Savon, hinting that Savon may have been moving disingenuously and told a side of the story that wasn't accurate in order to stay in good graces with Joe, as Joe is the one with the higher visibility and the bigger podcast. One of the biggest bones of contention starts off with Maul saying that he never said he was underworked and underpaid, that it was indeed Savon, Alex, Erickson, and Parks saying that they were underpaid. So therefore, he is disappointed in how Savon handled this interview. Maul also hints that Savon and Joe don't have any real relationship. After that, Rory steps in and says he spoke to Savon about the interview and communicated that he was disappointed in how Savon told the story, and says that Savon and Alex completely lied about how the meeting took place. Rory then reiterates what Maul said, saying that he and Maul never said they were overworked and underpaid, and it was actually Savon and Alex plus Parks and Erickson who said they felt like they weren't getting the proper compensation for all the work that they were putting in. Julian then chimes in and actually makes a good point, saying that since Rory and Maul have removed themselves from the sphere of Joe's influence, they can now be thrown under the bus and positioned as everything that was wrong with the breakup. Rory and Maul have become the fall guys, and now Savon, Alex, Erickson, and Parks can lay every issue they had with Rory and Maul, since they are no longer in the room. A little bit later, Rory doubles down and calls Alex a liar, and says he saw a whole new nefarious side of Scream Man when he made up the story about Maul telling him he was overpaid. Maul then says he never had any type of real conversation with Alex. It was all very surface level. Therefore, he would have never told Alex he felt overworked and underpaid. After this, Maul does something he's been doing before. He says that Joe stole money, which is interesting because Rory doesn't follow up with him on that. I feel like there's a disconnect between Rory and Maul in this regard. I don't know if Rory doesn't think Joe didn't steal money or that he just doesn't want to go down that path due to not wanting to open the pathway to a lawsuit from Joe's behalf. Anyway, after Maul says Joe stole money, he goes into the story about how the rest of the staff outside of Rory and Maul told Rory and Maul they felt they weren't being compensated. And Rory follows up and says, Savon and Alex were the people who initiated this whole conversation about feeling overworked and underpaid. Now, this is a very big point to focus in on, as Joe Budden and the rest of the members on the show often try to position this as if it was Rory and Maul who conducted this meeting, said, hey, we're going to meet after the Rosa Acosta interview and we're going to talk about how this show's going to go. It's time to take over the Joe Budden podcast. That's essentially how Joe paints the picture. And it is how Parks, Savon, and Alex also tried to paint the picture. Then Rory decides to drop some numbers and says that he was prepared to give 40 grand of whatever he was going to earn that month, I guess from the podcast, the Patreon, to the rest of the cast. Now, we need to zoom out and look at what Rory said. If he's getting paid 40 grand, that means Maul was getting paid 40 grand. And that is all part of the calculation that Joe did, right? He said on his Patreon that Rory and Maul each got 15% of the net profits. So that would mean 40,000 for Maul, 40,000 for Rory, and 140,000 for Joe. I think we are starting to get a picture of what Joe is calculating per year. As let's say if he's making 140,000 per month, that means Joe might be making $1.7 million a year off of the podcast. That's just the podcast. Who knows what he's raking in with his side ventures on things like Amazon and, other things that he likes to do. Aw man, we're finally getting down to the nitty gritty. After this, Rory talks about Parks telling Joe of the secret meeting and reveals that after Parks told Joe about the secret meeting, he hit Ian up and requested that everyone have a meeting to clear the air and have Parks say what he said to Joe so that they could prove Parks was lying. That's a bombshell. Rory is finally saying that Parks was lying about what happened, and I believe he's telling the truth, as Parks just doesn't seem to want to say what happened, and I think it's because if he did, he would reveal that he was the one who felt overworked and underpaid. I say this from the perspective of someone who's been watching the podcast and even seeing Parks say on multiple occasions that he feels overworked, and also hinting that the podcast records more than anyone who makes content in the space. Furthermore, it really seems like Rory and Maul just have a big old issue with Savon, with Maul even kinda hinting that Savon is being two-faced and acting one way in front of Joe and one way in front of Rory and Maul. Julian then makes another point that I have been making for years on this channel and says that Parks jumped ship on Rory and Maul once he saw Joe starting to get fed up with Rory and Maul, and Parks turned into self-preservation mode to protect his bag, and basically threw Rory and Maul under the bus. Great minds think alike, Jules. Shout out to you. After this, Maul doubles down on something he said before about Joe screwing Parks over in previous business dealings before the pod. I guess he's talking about things like studio time, production, that Parks was never paid for. Oh man, Maul, you're getting a little nasty. A little bit later, Maul says he has no interest in speaking to Savon again after how he conducted himself during the interview. Rory then addresses something I've said on this channel before, not saying he was responding to me directly, but a lot of people have this belief that Rory wants to go back to the Joe Budden podcast. And he says he doesn't, and he never wants to do a show with Joe again. So there you have it. After this, Maul kind of reveals how he isn't much of a content creator when he says that you can't have a great interview while lying, so he thought that the interview was whack. Well, the interview actually did great for Savon. It's probably going to be the most viewed interview on the channel by miles. And he says you can't have a great interview if you're lying. That's not necessarily true, Maul. And I think that's what has done you a disservice in your war with Joe, is that you've assigned morals to something that doesn't necessarily apply to content. and that's why your passive aggressive shots at Joe really don't land. I gotta give you credit for even doing this podcast and addressing it, but I have to say that you came off as super childish. Every time something would happen to Joe, you would tweet out emojis laughing, and we would never hear from you. You just don't know how to deal with the fact that you have to talk about the truth from your perspective. And you can't get mad at other people for playing the media game. You just simply have to get better at it. Now, here's another thing that happens on this episode is that Rory and Maul also shed light on firing Carl. On the episode with Savon, Joe, and everybody, Carl was also present in the room. I guess he was working with Savon now, found a new job, shout out to you, and talked about why he was fired from the Rory and Maul podcast. And the story basically lined up with what Carl said. Carl lost the cameras. He was very flippant about losing the cameras. He was too cavalier, and it just seemed like he didn't really care. I even think from listening to them, it kind of almost sounds like Carl might have stole them joints. I don't know, the way it was coming off, like Carl didn't alert anybody to how these things disappeared. That's what it sounded like. It sounded like there's room for Carl to have done the camera swiping, but I don't know. I don't want to. Carl, don't run down on me, man. I don't want nobody running down on me, man. And it was upon this that Maul said Carl was incompetent and too lackadaisical about losing the cameras, so they decided to fire Carl. I have to give it to Rory and Maul, as they did stand on business. And hey, Carl, you deserve to get fired. You was bugging out. You was bugging the hell out. Matter of fact, I don't even know if you should have told that story. I wouldn't have told that story. I don't want nobody knowing about that, because if I was another podcaster and I saw you did that and you lost the cameras and didn't care, I wouldn't hire you. I'd be like, nah, I don't need Carl on my team. I need someone like Eden. I need someone like Erickson. They're not going to lose my cameras. Don't ever get tricked into saying that story again. And if you say that story again, Carl, you better come out remorseful. Oh my God, Rory was my guy. I didn't want to lose the cameras. You are messing up future bags. Anyway, that's a rant. But I think one of the highlights of this episode is Maul saying he would never mess with Joe again, and that he knows what Joe is trying to do by saying that he's cool with Rory, but he's not cool with Maul, hinting that Joe is a bit of a conspiracy nut who watches TV shows, and he's trying to play out a TV show in real life by pitting Rory against Maul. And also Maul says that he doesn't care if Rory is cool with Joe. I don't know how true that is. I don't know if that's posturing. I could see Maul feeling a type of way if Rory was cool with Joe after everything that went down. Rory and Maul then end by saying that Joe wasn't paying out of his money. He was simply siphoning the Spotify money to pay for expenses, and that his positioning that he was paying out of pocket for everything is erroneous and a lie. But I wish they would have talked about what Joe says, that he paid for their salary after the Spotify deal with the pull-up money, with the Cash App sponsorship. I wish they would have answered that, because that seems like a valid point. And I also don't know if Joe's 100% accurate, because while he's paying them, he's also seemingly running some good creative accounting to stifle Rory and Maul's whole profit. But this was a fascinating episode. Clap it up for Rory and Maul. They actually are pretty good when they decide to get in this bag, and they put it behind the paywall. They learn from the Podfather. Put all of this stuff behind the paywall, man. You got to pay your peoples. You got to pay yourself. Had you done this at the time y'all break up, oh my God, would have been fascinating. And y'all should do a whole series. The secret meeting, the expenses. Tell me about the tour. This should be a series. The breakup. Y'all dropping a bag, man. Oh my God, y'all would be the number one. Rory and Maul would be number one podcast if they said, all right, y'all, we're going to put the Rory and Maul podcast on hold. We're going to do a documentary style podcast about the breakup. Episode 1 will be covering the launch of the podcast. Episode 2 will be covering the firing of Marissa. Episode 3 will be covering the addition of Maul, Maul's background, his relationship, his history with Joe. That will send y'all to the moon. All of the haters, all of the Joe haters who say you suck, they'll be like, oh, damn, I gotta listen to these dudes. Ugh. And then Joe will be in his feelings on his couch. You know he's gonna be talking about it. He's gonna break, he's gonna fold. And oh my God, Pod Wars, 4th quarter. You're missing out. Anyway, I gotta stop giving y'all game, man. Hopefully y'all do it one day. But y'all cut from that cloth. I don't know if you'll go that far. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. I highly suggest you get Rory and Maul's Patreon just for this episode, as I think it was more revealing than even that initial response they did to Joe a few years ago. Alright, so I got more content coming from this episode too, as there was somebody on the show, the Joe Budden show, who received some shots from Rory and Maul. Deservedly so. Follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. Follow me on Reddit, Joe Budden Network. Like, comment, subscribe. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace!
Rory is here.
You ain't about to get no exclusive for The Stop. You ain't trustworthy.
Yo!